In 2 miles,
And
take
welcome
exit
back. I am
41 onto
Thomas.
Wolf Hill Road towards South Huntington.
Today we're going to Green Lawn, true crime story. One of the oldest homes in Green Lawn, which we're visiting, is known as the Smith Gardner House. And it's on the northeast corner of Little Plains Road and Park Avenue, if you guys do ever want to visit it for yourself. It was owned and lived in by Herbert Gardner. Gardner is spelled with an I in the middle. The last family member to live there, right? Having no relatives to speak of, upon his death in 2002, the house was eventually bestowed to the Green Lawn Centerport Historical
Use the right lane
Association.
to take exit 41 onto
Herbert
Wolf
and
Hill
his
Road
twin
towards
brother
South
Harold were
Huntington.
both born in the house. They were twins, born in 1902. They lived there with their two older sisters, Alice and Zella, until their deaths. Throughout the time Herbert lived there, which was his whole life, the house was virtually untouched. A time
Take the exit, then
bringing
turn
those
left
who
onto Wolf Hill
entered
Road towards South
back
Huntington.
decades. Today, the house it's on part of the National Register of Historic Places. That means it has one of those plaques, and this is how the house looked back then, particularly the 1800s, 1842, which we'll soon get to that story. Just giving you a little history on the house right now. It's meaning with being on the National Historical Association, it means that it's always protected from falling apart, and work is always done to upkeep the house.
Turn left.
What many people don't know that in this very house there was a terrible double murder that took place in 1842.
In half a mile,
It is
turn right onto
believed
Old Country Road.
that the house was built by Henry Smith sometime during the mid 1700s. It's a 3-bay, 2.5-story colonial featured house. To this day, there are several outbuildings on the property, including a large barn, a shed, a chicken coop, and a family cemetery.
Turn right onto Old Country Road.
Now, Henry Smith, he was married 3 times and had 2 sons by his second wife. One son, Alexander Smith, was born in 1773, and he lived in the house his father built through both his first and second marriages. He was a well-known and respected member of the community. Alexander's first marriage was to Elizabeth Chichester, and they had one daughter named Fanny. It was with his second wife, Rebecca Lefferts, that their lives ended in a terrible tragedy on November 13th, 1842. A German farmhand by the name of Anton Keisler had been employed, at the Smith farm for 2 weeks at that point. And when you think about Green Lawn at the time, Green Lawn was a neighborhood that was known as Old Fields. Now, Kaiser, knowing that Alexander Smith was a wealthy farmer, he set out to rob him one Sunday evening. When Kaiser entered the house, he saw both Alexander and Rebecca there. He then brutally both murdered them with a mason's hammer and possibly an axe as well. We're looking at the house once again, how it looked back then. It was believed it was his intention to search for money and then burn the house down in order to destroy the evidence. However, he became startled by by a type of sound, possibly passing wagons. He gave up his search for the money, and he left a canister of gunpowder on the steps of the front door. The next morning, another farmhand, this time by the name of George Weeks, reported to work at the Smith farm. Weeks, he had lived a quarter of a mile away, and his usual routine was to stop at the Smith farmhouse before heading out into the fields. On the morning of November 14th, he noticed that a window on the east side of the house had been shattered. As he peered into the broken window of the front parlor,
Turn
he
left
made a
onto
gruesome
Foxhurst
discovery. Mr. and Mrs. Smith lay dead in a pool of blood. By 1 p.m., the Suffolk County coroner had been called to the Smith house. When he arrived, he saw that there was blood not only underneath the victims, but in the middle of the floor as well. Drops of blood could be traced throughout the house, along with the bloodied footprints. The hammer and axe were found at the crime scene. Now, this is the description from the coroner during deposition. Alexander lay with his head from the fireplace. His body was chiefly consumed up to his third or fourth rib. His body was examined in his presence by Dr. Ray. There were 3 wounds on the left side of his head, immediately over the lower portion of the cartilage of the left ear, making 3 holes through the cartilage. Large cut at the interior and posterior cartilage of the same ear. Skull was fractured on the top of the head. Jeez. Wounds must have been inflicted with some heavy instrument like a hammer with a flat end. Miss Smith was lying in the right corner of the fireplace, her head at the corner of the hearth. She has 2 wounds upon the forehead, one producing a fracture of the skull, the other a depression. There were 4 wounds upon the upper and posterior part of the head, one creating a depression of the bone. Supposes the same instrument had been inflicted in the wound that caused the death of Alexander. Her dress was bloody down to her waist. Supposed some of the wounds on Miss Smith's head to have been inflicted while she was lying down. Talk about gruesome. She seems from appearance to have struggled. The report goes on to further say that from their positions, Miss Smith must have been killed first. Now, word of the double murders, it spread quickly. Imagine with social media how it would have spread now. But at the time, the local newspaper, which was the Long Islander, wrote the following. It was entitled Horrible Murder. Never has it been our melancholy task on any former occasion to present to our readers the details of a murder so atrocious in every feature as the one committed a few nights ago in the vicinity of our village. We do not remember to have heard of one so appalling for many years. On Sunday evening last, Mr. Alexander Smith, extensively known as a worthy and wealthy farmer residing at Oldfields, which is now Green Lawns, and his wife were murdered. The bodies were discovered on the following morning, lying on the hearth, that of Mr. Smith nearly consumed by fire into which it had fallen on receiving a blow from the assassin, and that of Miss Smith nearby, weltering in blood which had flowed from several wounds inflicted on the head. Now, see, this is the historical marker that kind of symbolizes the tragedy that happened at this house over 200 years ago. Well, close to 200 years ago, rather. Sorry, my math. It was unheard of anything of this nature could occur in such a quiet and peaceful farming community. For long, the dreadful news spread across the nation. Several days now after the murders, Anton Keisler was caught in Port Jefferson, which is a few towns over, not too far away. On June 5th, 1843, he was convicted and executed for the double murder of Alexander and Rebecca Smith. We're approaching the house here. Smith's only daughter, Fanny eventually married Joe Gardner, and they had 6 children. One of them was Alexander Gardner, who inherited 400 acres of the property from his mother. He became the most successful pickle farmer in Greenlawn. Now, today, they say that the Smith Gardner house quietly holds the secret of its history, right? From a horrifying murder to the success of a hard working man. And even to this day now, right? Some 200, close to 200 years later, if you go on the property of this farm, it's actually opened to the general public as we are approaching the house here. You see it right in the corner of your eye.
Then turn right.
Straight ahead right after this light on the right hand side. Boom. There is the house. I'm going to turn back around. That way you could get a better picture
Light, turn right onto Park
of the
Avenue.
house,
Then turn right.
how it stands now. And Greenlawn, Greenlawn Old Fields as it was known before. If I were to give you a number, we are, just for reference sake, we are probably about 50 miles from the city. Here's how the house looks like now. Remember, it's on the National Register's list. That means it is the job of the state, of the community, I'm not sure exactly, to make sure that this house is properly maintained. To think, and I always say, I wonder if people know the history of, things around them. One of the most gruesome murder in the 1800s. I hope all is well. Look forward to speaking.